Today I will be taking a look at two David Cronenberg horror films released here in the UK by Second Sight. There can't be many of us now not aware of Second Sight, and therefore you know these releases are going to be fairly special and packed with a wealth of extras. There are also special packs available from Second Sight. These are the standard packs, so I shall leave a link in the description below so you can make your way over to the website if either of these or both or the special packs do appeal to you. Now, I thought I'd start with a later film, Scanners. The Brood was 1979, Scanners was 1981. This film was notorious back in the day, and it was notorious specifically for the famous head explosion scene. I'm not sure I saw this all the way through when it was new. I certainly didn't see it at a cinema. I don't think it got much of a release here in the UK, not to local cinemas anyway, and so might have been seen in the West End or across London, but not so much locally. And so at the time I didn't get a chance to go and see this. I probably would have done, because I was a bit of a horror addict as a teenager, and just about any horror film that was coming out I would go and see, or I'd see it somehow. And I think I only saw this at a friend's house on VHS. When VHS was first making inroads, this seemed to be one that just about everyone I knew wanted to see, and so I sat down to enjoy possibly the first 3/4 of an hour or so, and I didn't like it much then, but it was VHS television at the time, didn't really have the sort of quality that we're enjoying today, and certainly not from VHS. So the head explosion scene, yes, it made an impact, but you couldn't really see it as you see it now. I can't imagine this would have looked as good as this in cinemas back then, not in local cinemas anyway. But that head explosion sequence, that really does stand up. I think that's more impressive now than it's ever been. But there's quite a lot in this film that's I can appreciate looking at today that I couldn't back in 1981 or 82 whenever I actually saw it. But it's a bit dated, and it's that dated nature of it that holds a certain appeal, and I think I'm liking this more today than I would have done at any time previously. It has an image aspect ratio of 1.85 to 1 approximately, comes with mono and a 5.1 soundtrack, come on to that in a moment, and a running time of 1 hour and 43 minutes. Now, the obvious thing for many of us to do when you've got the option of a 5.1 track is to select that in the menu and listen to that multi-channel sound. But I started off with the original mono sound, went to the 5.1, and after 5 or 10 minutes I thought this really isn't sounding very good in here, so went back to the mono sound, and I'm very pleased I did, because that is a high quality soundtrack. The 5.1, it seems to be messed up to me. I'm not a fan of it. Try it on your system. It might sound better on yours, or not quite as harsh on the ears on your system as it does on mine, but didn't work in here. So I stuck with a mono sound, and I think that is of very good quality. The image quality is very good, and that's largely what we've come to expect these days from Second Sight films, so no surprise there. I enjoyed the film far more than I would have done back in the day, but I don't think it's the best horror film ever made, and having gone through I think all of the extras, there's probably 2 hours or more of them on there, I have learned that this one was still being written, as it were, as they were making it, due to tax break reasons, had to be started and finished by a certain date. There was something like that going on in Canada to try and encourage the film industry there. So there are a few compromises in this. It's not really too obvious, but does have a feeling of a film that wasn't quite fully developed when they started shooting, and that is indeed the case. But a notorious film from 1981. I'm not sure it ever got the video nasty treatment, but we'll rely on John and Mondo Chelovec to fill us in on that, if that was indeed the case. So 1981, you would sort of expect that to be the better of the two, but having watched them on successive nights in here, I think The Brood is the better of the two films. I didn't much like this one when I first saw it. It would have been on a television broadcast back then actually, because again we didn't get the chance to see this at the cinema. I was a bit young and probably wouldn't have been able to sneak in anyway, but I don't think it got a major release to local cinemas around the whole of the UK. It did get a Super 8 release, a 400-foot reel, and it's one of those I never actually saw, but When I saw it on the telly, I didn't like it much. The subject matter was a bit horrible, but now I'm a couple of years older again. You can look at it with fresh eyes, and I thought this was a suspenseful and fairly scary film. So not that anything really scares me these days. I did watch too many horror movies as a child, and so I got desanitized to them at quite a young age. But there are a few that will still put there's slight jitters up me, I suppose, and there are parts of this where I thought this is creepy, so that's quite unusual. I suppose it's not entirely unusual, but it's quite unusual to feel in here, oh, this is a bit unnerving. But I found the brood in this so obvious how they were done, but that seemed to work. The practical effects seemed to work, and it's got that typical Cronenberg body horror sequence in it that I won't go into any details, but I found that quite horrific. Now again, this is a 1.85 to 1 aspect ratio, and this time only comes with a mono sound, and I thought the mono sound quality of this was exceptional. It was reminiscent really of watching The Terminator on 35mm, the analogue mono soundtrack of that as Simon Nichols' home cinema. I thought the quality of this was up there with the quality of that fabulous soundtrack on The Terminator. It has a running time of 1 hour and 32 minutes. The image quality of this one did in here look much better than Scanners, which is very good, as I said, but this one I think is excellent. So I made a comment in my review of Gladiator 2 when I quipped that it's a shame Gladiator 2 doesn't look as good as these two, but in particular The Brood. There's something about this, and it's not only a great looking film to look at, it's got that Canadian Montreal look again, but it's got a very good atmosphere to it, a very creepy atmosphere, and I think the Howard Shore score of this one does help. It's sort of an influence, I think, from the Psycho soundtrack, but it works. It's got that sort of thumping, heavy sound to it, not subtle at all in places, and it just helps this story go along. So it's got a good atmosphere to it, a great look, and I thoroughly enjoyed revisiting The Brood after all these years. Not one I would have possibly gone for if it hadn't been issued by one of the great Blu-ray providers such as Second Sight. So thoroughly entertaining, a wealth of extras again, and one of those I'm now thinking, should I have got the special pack of this? But you know, there was a chance of getting maybe one of those special packs or two of the David Cronenberg films both released on the same day, so I think I made the right decision, but I'm always going to be thinking now, so maybe I'll be tempted when I'm next in an HMV and I see the special pack of this on the shelf. We'll see. But I very much enjoyed revisiting both of these after all these years, and I think the film that got me into Cronenberg was Rabid. I think this was 1975, wasn't it? I'm not sure of the year this Major 8 400 foot Super 8 was released. It was 79 or 80, I think. But anyway, it was around that time in a clamshell case. And of course, these clamshell cases, these were first developed by Piccolo Films in France. And this is where we owe the present packaging that we enjoy today to. It actually came from the first mass market or near mass market of home movies, and that was Super 8 film. So this was really what got me into David Cronenberg. I was into all the horrors at the time. My brother and I loved to see all the horrors that came out, and there was no way of seeing Rabid. I think it was 1975, wasn't it? So not one we had the chance to see in the cinema. But this 400 foot reel, this is part of growing up for me. This was what my childhood was largely about. Now I look back on it, and I know youngsters will look at this and say, well, what was the interest in having 17 or 18 minutes of extracts or a digest of the feature on Super 8? That's ridiculous, but you have to put yourself back into those times. There were two ways of seeing a film: at the cinema, and if you missed that, you had to wait 3, 4 or 5 years to see it on the television. So these sort of almost mass market productions of Super 8 cut-downs were the only other opportunity you had to enjoy the films you liked in your home. And this was one has stuck with me. It's one of those sort of potential worldwide disaster movies. I'm not sure how you classify it, but for me there was Day of the Triffids, and then the 1976 BBC series of Survivors, and then there were other films, and Rabid was potentially one of those, so I loved it. And what I really like about this, on top of the great story, the horrifying story, is the look of it. And I now know that it was that Montreal, Canada look that all those films get, because the light there is different to what we see in our own countries. Maybe not if you live in Canada, but here in the UK, maybe Los Angeles and the USA, where most films seem to be made, Australia, the light is different. They've got a different appearance, and that is part of the appeal of these Cronenberg horror films. Right, I think that brings me to the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like, perhaps subscribe if you haven't already. And until the next video, bye-bye for now.